Hi, everyone. Welcome
Good.
to the ICA's monthly speaker series, Navigating ICBPS Conversations with Experts. We are delighted that you're here with us today to learn about clinical trials from Dr. Robert Moldwin, Professor of Urology at the Zucker School of Medicine at Hofstra Northwell, and Director of the Pelvic Pain Treatment Center at the Arthur Smith Institute for Urology of the Northwell Health System, and also a member of ICA's Medical Advisory Council. Please note that this session will be recorded. If you are on camera, your video will be included in the recording. We will have a Q&A session following the presentation. To ask a general question related to this topic throughout the session, please use the chat feature. Once the Q&A session has started, you may also use the raise hand feature in Zoom. You will be asked to unmute yourself. If you aren't speaking, please be sure to stay muted. Dr. Moldwin will answer as many questions as he can during the webinar. And finally, please complete the post-webinar survey. A link to the survey has been posted in the chat. It's time to get started. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Moldwin.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon or morning or wherever you are. Let me just go into share my screen here if I can. I think I am sharing my screen. Is that correct now? And I'm going to bring. Do you see my screen? No, you do not? Okay, hold on. Let me just make sure that's going to happen. All right, we'll do that. Hopefully you'll see it. Share, there we go. Gee, I think I know how to do this by now. I've done it enough times. All right, and here's my, now do you see what, where we are? Huh?
Yep.
We got that? Okay. So the title of this talk is Your Journey Through Clinical Trials, Impact and Expectations. And really what I'll be focusing on this afternoon are something called randomized placebo-controlled clinical trials, and I'll get into what all those terms mean. But keep in mind, there are all sorts of different research projects that involve patients, patient care that you should know about and possibly might even think about joining some of these projects. So here are my disclosures to start off with. So the first question is, why are you here? You know, I presume you sort of know the answer to this one. Why do we need clinical trials for ICBPS? And that's because there's really a significant unmet need. We have a lot of patients who continue to suffer immense pain, frequency, all the, you know, the decreased quality of life that ICBPS brings to people. And in the past over 30 years at this point, there are only 2 FDA-approved treatments for the condition, one being pentosan polysulfate sodium, which is Elmron, and the other, and that's only in the United States. And of course, and elsewhere, but again, in the United States, and dimethyl sulfoxide, which is for those of you who are unaware, dimethyl sulfoxide is one of the FDA-approved medications that is a liquid, and it goes into the bladder directly through a catheter. Often is associated with a lot of burning and irritation before it might even help any given patient. The biggest problem is that these therapies definitely do not help a significant number of patients, and we need more. That's really what it comes down to. We need more. So the real question is, you know, why haven't research efforts resulted in a cure as yet? And I have a whole bunch of possible answers for you. You may disagree or not, or you may agree or disagree. But one, I think that most experts in the field, most scientists in the field would agree about, is that there probably are a lot of different causes for the symptoms of ICBPS, and that may be varied from patient to patient. So there may be some patients who are deriving most of their pain, for example, from a bladder problem, a sensitivity issue, and other patients, at least some large portion of the pain may be coming from other sources like the nervous system, could be autoimmune issues and so forth. So these are, and if you use one medication, it's directed towards the bladder, obviously it's going to fail in any patients that you are examining through a research study. if they don't have that as the cause of their symptoms. Okay. Another one is just the fact that even, if you look at the interstitial cystitis guidelines that we have through the AUA, the American Urological Association, and if you even look at global guidelines, you will see that most of the medications, the clear vast majority of medications and devices and therapies that we apply to the IC patient are off-label, meaning they're not FDA approved, but they do seem to be helpful. So we commonly use anti-seizure medicines, we use antidepressants, not for their qualities as an antidepressant, but for their qualities in reducing pain. So, but for many patients, those off-label uses, those medications have been helpful. And therefore, if you're feeling okay, why be part of a research study, right? So that's really, I think, a big problem we have with trying to get patients involved in the studies that are out there. Also, this is just a way of life in the research arena. As I see investigators, we find, at least I certainly find, that usually the patients who tend to volunteer for these studies are the patients who have failed everything else, and they're really coming to this as almost a last resort. And that's a problem because they don't really represent the larger population of IC patients afflicted with interstitial cystitis. So it's sort of biased against any given medication or any product that's going to be investigated. I think another reason is that patients are just not aware that the studies are around. If you don't know about them, how could you possibly even think about becoming part of a participant in a study? And I would really urge you to take a look at this website. It's called clinicaltrials.gov. These are the ones that are United States based. And I just went to the internet a few days ago and I just sort of cut and pasted a whole mess of them. There are way more than these. And some of them are what we're going to be really talking a lot about, what are called RCTs, these randomized controlled trials. Some of them are not controlled. Some of them are not placebo controlled. Some of them are just you get a medication just to see how things are going. And in fact, if you have some benefit, it may go on to later studies where that the medication or the device or what have you, the therapy itself would be under more scrutiny. But there are a lot of things out there that might be of help to you. So before you can ever get involved in a clinical trial, what the heck is it? Really, I think probably one of the best definitions I could give you is just a clinical trial is really investigating the safety and efficacy and also the proper dosing of a new, but it could be an old drug, could be an off-label drug, or a device, some type of therapeutic approach for a patient or a condition, in this case, of course, interstitial cystitis. It can be initiated by in different ways. So for example, in our group, we often have just independent investigators or a lot of different investigators from perhaps many different academic institutions that join forces to move a project forward. Many of these are grant supported, meaning the National Institutes of Health and various other sources, even pharmaceutical companies can support some of these investigator-initiated trials. Another way, the standard one that you're probably all used to thinking about how a drug gets approved is through a pharmaceutical or a device company. And of course, it doesn't have to be a standard pharmaceutical or device company. It could also be initiated by a private non-pharmaceutical company. For example, a company that makes a vitamin company or a company that makes nutraceuticals. So lots of different ways that these studies can start up. So that's it. That's the real basics. Let's talk about, I want to sort of move into that whole concept of a randomized placebo-controlled trial, because those are the trials that are going to get a specific type of therapy approved for everyday use for the IC patient. And I mentioned before that whole concept of placebo-controlled trials. And I put down here in this bullet, placebo versus non-placebo. So if I'm investigating a medication and the patient knows what they're getting right off the bat, I give you a pill, I give it to you, there's a pretty good chance that you might have a favorable response, even though I gave you a sugar pill. So that's called the placebo effect. And in fact, placebo effect in terms of pain studies has been shown to be, it can be 30% or higher. So that's pretty good. I mean, you can almost treat a patient like that. But it's not, in order to evaluate a drug very carefully and with, again, a lot more scrutiny, we like to have a placebo-controlled cohort. So perhaps half the patients, one half of the patients would get the placebo, the other half would get the real medication. It could be different doses that we can divide it up. And very frequently there's a placebo, what we call a placebo arm, and maybe different doses of medication. So if you enroll in a study, does it mean you're going to be on placebo? Is it a 1-to-1, a 50-50 chance? Most studies are created so that it gives the patient a fairly good chance of getting the real medication, but there is that possibility you may get nothing. Also, you may get a medication at a dose that might not be an effective dose. So these are all being done so we can, again, evaluate the medication or the therapy as effectively as possible. And also we'll talk about side effects later. These studies are either single or double blinded, okay? Sometimes they're not blind at all. Everybody knows what you're getting. But often we do like to blind studies, meaning that the investigator doesn't know. A double-blinded study means the investigator doesn't know what the patient is getting, and the patient doesn't know what they're getting either. And it's all controlled through a third party, like a pharmaceutical company, or again, any type of third party that can be used within an institution. So double-blind placebo-controlled studies, you can imagine, are really bringing that drug or that therapy of any sort to the best scrutiny possible to figure out if it's really working or not. There's also the randomized versus the non-randomized study. So for example, how do you know that you're going to become the placebo control patient, or you're going to get whatever dose that you would get during a given study? How do you figure out who's going to get what? A computer does it, okay? It's random. We don't want the doctors or any clinicians choosing, and we don't want the patients choosing. We want complete non-biased studies. So in effect, the best studies out there, and it's the short term for it is RCTs, are randomized, double-blinded, placebo-controlled trials. Now, are these the only trials that you could get involved with as a patient? Absolutely not. There are plenty of great trials that have no placebo. They're not randomized. These are all reasonable studies to do, but they're not the ones that are going to get the medication or the treatment over the finish line to get FDA approval. So you should understand that. Are they reasonable studies? The other types of studies, are they reasonable to say, you know, this drug looks like it might be having a benefit for patients? Absolutely. And there's no reason not to get involved, because if you have favorable effects with those other studies, those studies that, where the drug is less scrutinized, it might give you, the investigators, a reason to go further for more aggressive clinical trials like RCTs. So it goes beyond that. All right. Trials don't start with you just coming into the office to become a research subject. It goes through phases. So phase 1, usually you're not going to get involved with at all, but you might. This only involves about 20 to 100 people. They may have the condition like I see or not. The real goal of this phase 1, is to establish safety, efficacy, and dosing, to give us a basic idea of where we should go in later phase trials that, of course, will have many more participants. So that's really important. And even before phase 1, you can rest assured that there were preclinical studies where, for example, it may be done in a test tube, or it may usually be done in animal studies to basically show that this type of therapy might be useful, and that it's not going to hurt people when we start exposing them to that particular remedy. Phase 2, several hundred people now, and these are people who would be afflicted with the conditions such as ICVPS. And here, of course, again, safety is the #1 thing. We want to know also to monitor patients for side effects. It doesn't mean just because you have a side effect doesn't mean you can't take the medication. And we also, of course, want to see what the efficacy of the medication is. And these are still not lots of patients in these studies. Phase 3 then goes beyond that. There, we're talking about hundreds to thousands of people. And here, again, it's basically very similar to phase 2, but it's more, we're talking about many more centers that are probably going to be needing to be investigators. And again, efficacy and monitoring of side effects. And finally, phase 4 studies. This is after the FDA approves medications, they still watch them. And these are studies that are thousands and thousands, we would imagine, of people. And this is really long-term monitoring for side effects or for some, from basically side effects and problems, and maybe even potentially change of dosing or labeling. So this is another important component. But for the most part, if you're going to be involved, the vast majority of patients will be involved in phase 2 or phase 3 studies. Most patients will probably be in phase 3 studies, you can imagine, because there's so many more patients that are enrolled in these studies. So just so you get, it's a long, very expensive process. So you decide, you know what, I'm going to take a swing at this. Let me see, that sounds interesting. I want to move the field forward. I want to participate. I'm still having a lot of symptoms. Maybe this could help me. But you know what? It's not so simple. I wish it was. And there are downsides and upsides to becoming a participant in a study. But one thing you should understand, that if you enroll, you will be working with, I don't think there's any, these studies are very closely monitored. And the personnel that you would be working with all have specialized training in research, in the ethics that goes along with research, even history of research, and how we've improved over the years and new initiatives. And part of that is what's called the CITI training, Collaborative Institutional Training Initiative. All protocols, every study that's out there in any academic institution, at any pharmaceutical company, has to undergo what's called an IRB protocol review. These can be tedious processes where these are personnel at the individual's institutions, or sometimes people share IRBs. But in any event, this is a group of individuals with expertise in clinical trials. They're usually a combination of not only clinicians, but scientists and even lay personnel. And they review the protocol, they review the consents, and they bring up issues that bother them. Is this an ethical study? Is the patient population proper? Is it an ethical study? Are the patients going to be at risk? Is there going to be, are we going to be hiding? We do. Is there going to be, we want to de-identify information and be, consistent with HIPAA regulations. So all those things are really important for that IRB review. Once the study is initiated and the green light is given, patients, when they meet with their clinician who they want to enroll in a study, they're going to need to sign a consent. And that consent is already reviewed by that IRB. And this is, I could go on and on and on about consents, and there are long articles written about it. Suffice to say, it's many components and a lot of thinking and a lot of rewrites go into consents, because we want to give the patients a real good understanding, the upsides and the downsides of being part of this project. How long is the project? Are there risks? What are the risks? If there's a risk, what will happen to me? All these different things. It will also talk about confidentiality, why the study, of course, is being done, what we expect, what you should expect from the study, and so forth. So it's some of these consents can be rather lengthy, and also you should expect that the personnel at any given institution would be going over this in detail with you. So you really have a good idea of what's going on. You can take the consent home. You don't really, I'm not sure, let me read over this. Absolutely perfectly fine to do. And then you move on. Once you say, I want to be part of this study, this looks like something good for me, it's not over. Because just as you have to decide whether you're going to be in this study, The protocol is also going to ask, are you a good patient for this study? So your investigators might say, yeah, you sound okay, but they're going to have to go through a checklist of inclusion and exclusion criteria. You might be too young. We often have patients fill out voiding diaries. We often have patients fill out various questionnaires. And ultimately, there are lots of criteria that you have to meet to get into a study. And there could be something that where what's called screen fail. You really can't. We'd love to have you, but it's not going to work. A classic is, I mean, a simple thing is, of course, if you have a urinary tract infection, you're excluded. Usually, you can come back and retry out at some other point in time, as long as there's no urinary tract infection. But that's just a one thing that a very common thing that comes up. Any given trial, different lengths of trials. But in many pain-oriented trials, the trial will be at least 3 months length. There are many exceptions to this. We're involved in a study right now of a bladder installation. And it's only a 1 to 2 day trial. So that's a slam dunk. That's an easy one to do. But you have to realize that most trials will be long. We want to watch you over time and, of course, compare you to that placebo effect. Also, if you're going to be in a trial, it may require that some of these things you can just do over the web, but many of these things you are going to have to come back for many visits. So we have one trial going on right now. It's going to require 7 visits over a 3-month interval. So you have to be prepared for that type of thing. And if you live 30 miles, 50 miles away from your clinicians or wherever they're conducting the research, that may be a tough thing for you. They may need EKGs. You may need to stay at the institution because they want to monitor you for one reason or another. You might have to stay anywhere from 5 minutes to 5 hours. It's really hard to predict. And that's really dependent upon the type of trial. And that's why it's so important to read that consent and go over any questions you have with the personnel running it. One thing that's helped a lot recently are the development of e-diaries. So instead of keeping a piece of paper around, you can just mark it off on a little handheld device. Also, many of the trials, I had mentioned placebo controls. What if you get a placebo? Wouldn't that be sort of a crappy thing? I really want the real medication. Many trials have incorporated into them a crossover That means that when the trial is, let's say you reach the 3-month part and oops, maybe you did get placebo, maybe you didn't. There's many of the trial designers, just to make it more palatable for patients so that we can get more patients involved, have added on this crossover component where the second part of this study, you know what you're getting. So it's not placebo controlled anymore. It turns into a non-placebo controlled trial, where they just monitor you on the medication itself. So that might be an incentive for many people to join up. So I'm going to give you the upsides and the downsides. And I got to tell you, I'm going to lay out the world as it really is. I'm not going to, sugarcoat anything. There are a lot of downsides to joining a clinical trial. The upsides are really, obviously, we'll get into that, but they're very simple, as I'll explain in a moment. But the downsides are, we're working with a new type of therapy, and there may be adverse events. Most of the trials that I've seen in the realm of interstitial cystitis have not been terribly dangerous. Most of them are not trials that one would expect, really bad outcomes, heart disease or heart attacks or strokes or anything, God forbid, like that. But you should know about what the potential is, and that's a very important issue. Your time, I told you, if you live 50 miles away or more, I mean, that's a lot of time. And I live in New York, forget it. It could be 10 miles away, you're in traffic for, over an hour or whatever. So your time is important. And in many instances, you might be compensated for that. So you should understand some of that is built into some of the trial designs. Transportation costs, as I just mentioned. Again, some of this might be reimbursed. Again, I told you, it's the there are lots of studies that are not placebo-controlled, but the ones that will get the medications or the therapies over the finish line will be those RCTs. So you could get a placebo, or you could get maybe the real medication or the treatment, but it's not the right dose, or it's too high a dose or lower dose. So those are important things to keep in mind. And the other issue is something called washout. In many trials, let's say I'm testing out a new medication. And the way it works is by changing the surface of the bladder. Okay, let's say that's my clinical trial. But the patient's already on a medication that might alter the bladder surface. So in order to investigate that medicine, my new medicine, what am I supposed to do with the old medicine that does, or at least supposedly does, the same thing? And what we need, most protocols call for, is to wean off and down. We need to wash out those other, quote, conflicting medications or therapies, because otherwise we're going to have a problem figuring out what the real value of the investigational therapy is. So that's really important, and that's sometimes hard for patients to wrap their brain around. Many clinical trials, many patients do use opioids. That might be an exclusion criteria. You can't use it, and therefore it's really not going to work for you. Or you feel like your amitriptyline or your gabapentin was really helpful, but the other medicine is another medicine similar to those. You're going to have to come off the old one to go on to the new one. So a lot of people are a bit fearful about that. Of course, every trial is going to end at some point, right? I mean, I said 3 months, 6, whatever it is, it comes to an end point. And even if that drug does become available through and FDA approved, it's still going to take more time, of course, until it comes into the marketplace. So you would have to go back to your old therapies, unfortunately, at some point in time. And so why consider a trial? Very, very simple. It's really, of course, it's there to help you, especially if other therapies are not working, or you'd like to try something different, and the type of medication, or again, other type of therapy, does have some appeal to you. But it's a really benevolent thing to do. I mean, I have to say that the vast majority of people who become part of clinical trials are just wonderful people, of course, because there's not just thinking about themselves, but of course, this is really there to help others, to bring new therapies for those who continue to suffer with the condition. So that's my spiel for you this afternoon. I don't think I have any other slides, so I just have to say thank you for bearing with me and listening. I can do some questions.
Yep. So, Dr. Moldwin, we did get someone asking a question in the chat.
Sure.
She's asking, is it risky to be in a clinical trial, and are older
I'm
people?
stopping my share. Is that correct? Do I stop my share?
Yes.
You don't need me, right? Okay, good.
Correct. Thanks. So she's asking, is it risky to be in a clinical trial? Are older people eligible to participate?
All great questions. Okay, so let's start with so is it risky? It really depends on the therapy. I mean, I'd have to say, let's say there was a new therapy to put Clorox in your bladder. Okay, all right. Somebody liked that one. And in fact, it's funny. It's not funny. There was an old therapy. We don't really use it anymore. It's called chlorpactin, which is similar to Clorox. It was used many years back, where for the treatment of tuberculosis, because they didn't have antibiotics in the early days, and they put that into people's bladders, and lo and behold, it seemed to help some of the IC patients. So it's an interesting thing. But yeah, okay, so let's say we're looking at that. Well, yeah, that's a little scary. I mean, could it go up the tubes to the kidneys, back to the kidneys, and hurt the kidneys? Could it damage the bladder in any way? You have some background, because there'll be some preclinical studies done. If you're in a phase 3 study, you know that there was already a stage 2 study. So we do have usually some data, but if you're in the early phase studies, yeah, it's a little scarier. I would have to absolutely say yes. On the other hand, if it was putting milk in your bladder, oh, let's just have a milk bath in your bladder. That sounds good. Maybe it'll help. Maybe it'll coat the bladder. This fat and milk, who knows, maybe. That's probably, I would have to say that's pretty low risk. So I think that's, you have to look at every different study differently. What was the other part of that question? Sorry.
She asked, are older people eligible to participate?
Oh, okay. This is why I wouldn't be good at presidential debates. I can't remember 5 questions in a row. So older stuff. Usually there's age limits on studies, and those are part of the inclusion-exclusion criteria. So for example, usually because we don't want most studies, I mean, they could, but most studies do not include pediatric patients unless it's specifically designed for that. But again, every study is different. But usually, most studies that you're going to see are going to be 18 and older, so that might be a limit. There are a lot of studies that stop it at 75. I usually do not like that. We have plenty of 80-year-olds who are very, very healthy and they're suffering. What's different between 75 and 80? Again, it will vary from study to study, but there usually are, because the IRB wants that. Okay, the institutional board wants that. They want to see what age range you're looking at. Many studies, by the way, will just have females, right? Because maybe there are too many problems. We want to get into males, then we have to deal with prostate issues and blah, blah. It's just, let's just stick to females. And that may be part of some of the protocols as well, but not every protocol. That's why that's why it's important to get, if there's anything, I guess I could leave as a take-home message. One of the most important things, questions. That's why that consent is so important. It's going to be like this thick, it's a real pain in the neck to get through, but read it. And all consents, by the way, are supposed to be written, not for doctors. They're supposed to be written for you as a patient.
Okay, great. Thank you. Everyone, please feel free to ask questions in the chat or raise your hand. We have another one, Dr. Moldwin.
Sure.
What is in the OAG 1050 trial?
I have no, what is it? Oh, what is that? The OAB?
OAG 1050 trial?
OAG, I do not know. I'm really bad with those numbers.
Okay.
I can, hang on, that's the beauty of doing, this is like a regular web meeting. I know you're recording this, OAG 1050, you say?
Yes.
Study, I'll tell you, because guess what? I have Google. What is that? What does it say here? I'm sorry, I don't want to take up
I
everybody's
think
time.
someone just put a link in the chat.
Yeah, I have it here.
Oh, okay.
Okay, have a diagnosis, and you'll see here on the link, it has who can participate. These are really the inclusion-exclusion criteria. This just says an investigational medication for the treatment, and it is a tablet. It's interesting how a lot of these things are very secretive. Obviously, they don't want, this is not approved yet. They don't want, this all boils down to, I guess, some insider training, trading issues and stuff like that. But on this particular website, it says absolutely nothing on their website. So probably the best thing to do is to actually, contact. They're usually on those websites and through, again, that clinicaltrials.gov thing, that website, you usually give you some contact information where you can get a little more specifics on it and how it's supposed to help you.
Okay, great. Thanks. We have another question here. What is the required minimum number of patients to make a study scientifically worthwhile and acceptable?
Oh boy, that really comes down to, I didn't make any note of statistics. Every study has to have meet statistical significance, and there are and we choose what are called endpoints. What's going to be the factor that says a therapy works or it doesn't. Is it pain? Is it urgency? Is it a combination of both? So every time a study is created, the FDA and of course the investigators are looking to see what kind of measurements you're doing and why did you choose that as a quote endpoint. And those are things that are developed as further as the phase of the trial moves forward. Okay, so from 2 to 3 and so forth. So now what they'll do is they'll look at the differences between the placebo groups and the different dosing groups, perhaps, and they are going to see if there's statistical significance. I'm not going to go into the statistics because they could be different for any given study. But obviously, generally speaking, the better the medication, the bigger the difference between the placebo group and the actual, treatment group is, the smaller the number of patients that you need. And there are some newer studies now that are very interesting. They're sort of very fluid. They may, based upon as the information comes in, they can change the number of patients. Either we need more patients or we need fewer patients to finish this study off. So there are lots of different ways that investigators can change the number of patients, their target number, even as the study progresses. But bottom line is, it really comes down to an educated guess, and then working off of that based upon what you expect to see from your therapy.
Okay, thank you. We have another one. Does the FDA only accept RCTs?
As far as I know, yes.
Okay.
I mean, I may be missing something, but as a general rule, for all the medications we work with, there are going to be some type of phase type of trial studies. There may be some, and when we say randomized placebo controlled, they may be sham controlled also. So meaning that if it's a procedure, you may have to fake doing the procedure and so forth. So those are variations on a theme there.
Thank you.
Mhm.
We have someone with their hand up. Elisa, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm wondering about geographic restrictions. So there was a clinical trial that I wanted to know more about, and the main page didn't tell you very much, but I knew that there was something that wasn't too far from me. And it had a place on the webpage to put in my zip code, and I put it in. It says you're too far away. Well, it was only an hour and a half.
Oh,
And,
really? Okay.
yeah, and the even if you had severe frequency, you'd get there. But the city that it was being held in wasn't a large city. It was kind of more of a small city or a rural area. I didn't understand why they wouldn't want people from a nearby larger city to volunteer. And I'm just wondering if there's just some arbitrary number of miles in there that the website cuts it off at, that won't let you decide for yourself, whether that's a close enough place that you can go. And I knew what the medical center was, but I couldn't see the doctor's name. So if I wanted to get in there, I'd really have to dig. I'd have to call them and hope that there's somebody there that was willing to talk to me and tell me who the doctor is. Can I sign up? Can I find out anymore?
Yeah, it sounds to me like somebody screwed up there. I mean, most an hour and a half does not seem like a ridiculous amount of miles to go. Certainly, like in New York, that's really not a big issue. Everybody, I told you, 10 miles is an hour and a half. I mean, it's ridiculous. And if you're out in various other parts of the country, you're going to need to travel decent distances. That's just how it is. If we conducted all clinical trials like that, we wouldn't do very well at all. We really need to bring in as many patients as possible, and we have wonderful people who are willing to make the commitment and take the drive, and and the time and everything. Yeah, you have to really work with them. There are some centers I know that may say, we don't want to. We're only going to work with our patients that we're already treating, as opposed to new patients coming in from elsewhere where we don't know, we don't have a history, we don't have a chart on them, and so forth. So there are a lot of other factors that might be going on there. That's the only other thing I can think of, because again, that's not a good story you tell. They oftentimes, the pharmaceutical companies, I think they often will probably hire. I don't think they necessarily do it by themselves. They may hire a third party to accrue people, like marketing and this and that, and sending flyers out and putting ads in the community and all that. You even see things on the ICA website, of course. So that it's maybe they don't have as good control, but I would try them again just to be on the safe side, and just say, then what's your, you can ask them, like, so what exactly is the mileage limitation here? Because I don't really get that.
Right, so I'd have to find somebody at that center. I'd have to get somebody on the phone, who is willing to talk to me about that stuff.
Right. Or, like I say, get to the clinicaltrials.gov thing, and that may lead you to more of a clearinghouse for patients who are thinking of getting into the study.
I think that's where I came from. Like, that's how I found that page.
Yeah, and that's what I think those sometimes go through those third parties.
Okay, thank you. Well, wish me luck at contacting someone.
I have a feeling you're going to push through there. You're going to get that one done.
Yeah.
Okay, are there any other questions that anyone would like to put in the chat or would like to ask? I don't see any right now. Let's see.
Judy?
Oh.
You're on mute.
Okay. Hi, I hope this is an appropriate question, but I just like to know your thoughts on the nerve stimulator implant.
Oh, the implant, like you're talking about the InterStim or the axonics unit. I think I completely agree where I think again, this is interesting. We talk about non-FDA approved devices. We talk about off-label use. This is one of those devices that's used off-label, but we do know, just clinical experience, that it does help a lot of people. I think that I think where we have it in terms of the guidelines, our treatment guidelines, is appropriate. In other words, I wouldn't just jump to most, as I'm sure you can imagine, most patients don't, just give me one of those stimulators. I want it implanted in my body. That's just what I want. They'll do other more conservative things before they go to something like that. But once they, if you choose patients carefully, a lot of patients do really well. It controls, I think there's data to support this, that the people who do the best are going to be those who have they'll still have the urgency, frequency, always feel they have to go. But the added advantages, there are a lot of people who have pain. It's not FDA approved for pain. There are other much more complex, spinal cord stimulators, dorsal cord, all these different types of stimulator units that are FDA approved for it. But that InterStim it's a much simpler unit. It does seem to help a lot of patients who have bladder-based pain. So will it, because the problem is, since everybody does it anyway, and it's in the guidelines, is somebody going to take that next step and get it FDA approved for the treatment of interstitial cystitis? You wonder, because was the drug, the device company says, well, you're already using it. Well, what do we need to get an FDA approval for? It's in your guidelines. why go to the bother and spend, you know, more millions and millions of dollars getting it approved? So these are like the crazy things and the politics and all the craziness that goes on. But to answer your question directly, yes, I do think it helps a lot of patients. Particularly, I find also, aside from patients who have pain and urgency, it may also be very helpful for people who are just not, they don't seem to be as bladder centric. You know, you put medications even right into the bladder, anesthetics or whatever, and maybe they have some response, but they're really not doing that well. This definitely would be a nice next step, potential next step.
The spinal cord
Stimulate.
Stimulator. That is different from Exonics, correct?
Right. So Axonics and Medtronics, those units, they're called, it's the broad term for them are called sacral, sacral neurostimulator units. Okay. Not spinal cord. They're right. They're sacral neuro. It's called sacral neuromodulation. That's very different than the spinal cord stimulators that the pain management people might place, which are much more complex. Yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
It's hit and miss. They really were, you know, those, you know, conversely, as compared to those aren't, you know, they're used for pain, but there's not a lot of data that I'm aware of. I have to go back to the books again, but I don't think there's a lot of data on their benefit for specifically for bladder-based pain. But for people who have really bad back pain and those types of things, or even pelvic pain, some of those units and offshoots are pretty good. As far as the sacral neuromodulation, the two big companies that are out there are Medtronics and Axonics. Those are the two, and their units are very similar.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Thank you so much.
Sure, of course.
It looks like E and R Hardy have their hand up. If you'd like to ask your question and come off mute.
It was me. I just asked my question.
Oh, that was you. Okay. I thought I saw. Okay.
Oh, my hand's up too. Sorry. Okay. Okay, it's gone.
So here's a good question. I see. Do most IC studies separate Hunter? I can't read the end of that, but
so there's one before that. There's one. Okay, it says, to what extent do you phenotype or subtype patients for a study?
Oh, I have Jane online. Oh yeah. So do we subtype patients? Historically, unfortunately, no. And I think that has been something we realize has been really dumb. Not to, because again, it really came to, I think it was one of my third slide or something where I said, not every patient is alike. You know, people have said you're like a fingerprint or a snowflake. Everybody's different. But we can put people into broad categories, for example, and that's what we're starting to do now. So there will be patients, for example, who, you know, and this relates to the next question, clearly they have inflammation in their bladder. And those are these patients who have Hunter lesions. And there's no question their pain, or at least the vast majority of their pain, is coming from that bladder. It seems to be a specific, what we call a specific phenotype that in future studies, we may want to investigate them separately. Then there are the patients, for example, who they don't have the Hunter lesions, but they clearly still have pain coming from the bladder. They have pain when the bladder fills. They have less pain maybe when it empties. We put an anesthetic in the bladder and whoop, the pain goes down a lot. So we have a real gestalt that those patients are there. Then we have these patients who just come in, my bladder hurts, and it's always hurt. You know, and no matter what I do, I don't care if it's full, empty, it's just always hurting, but there's nothing in the bladder. So this is a separate type of patient who often have other problems, like, many other what are called comorbidities, such as chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, vulvar pain, migraine headaches, all sorts of different other issues, what we call more widespread pain. And it's believed that they may have more problems within the nervous system. Now, you could have a combination of them, but again, if we want to take a look at big, broad categories, let's say a patient now has lots of other problems. They have widespread pain. They give them what's called a body map, and they check off all over the place, but their bladder hurts also, but that's always hurting. But the installations don't help them and things like that. You have to imagine that would be a great candidate maybe for a medication that had its activity in the nervous system, as opposed to popping medicine directly in the bladder. On the other hand, a patient with Hunter lesions might do very well. It's clear they have inflammation in the bladder. Maybe they might respond to anti-inflammatory medicines. Maybe you respond to, because maybe it's linked to autoimmune disease. Maybe we can try some of the medicines that seem to be helping patients with rheumatoid arthritis or lupus. Maybe we should, maybe installations into the bladder, various types. So I think what we need to do now in the future is but we have to get the FDA on board with this. Okay, that's the big concern, because they'd like us to dump all the patients. We can look at them separately after the study, but they want everybody to be in the same pot. And I think if we do a little more of what I would call precision-based medicine, precision medicine like this, and precision studies, we'll call this. That's not my new term, I guess. Then I think we're going to have better results in the future. So it's a little long-winded, but yes. So phenotypes, they haven't been done. Do I think they should be done? 100% yes. And so yes. So do most studies separate Hunter ulcers patients from other IC patients? Most of the studies moving forward will do, at the very least, identify the presence or absence of a Hunter lesion, but they haven't pulled them apart. And they say you can do your what's called a sub-analysis, but as far as FDA approval, no word is, well, you still have to look at the general population, plopping them all together, which again, I think is incorrectly. That's the problem that we have here. Okay.
All right. Well,
I'm out of saliva now. So
well,
take a break.
thank you so much for being here with us today, Dr. Moldwin. Today's session was very informative. We hope all of you enjoyed this webinar and learned something new. If you found this event to be of value, please consider joining us for future webinars and share these opportunities with your community. Mark your calendar for July 18th for our next webinar titled IC-BPS and Chronic Overlapping Pain Conditions. Our speaker will be Chris Feasley, CPRA co-founder and director. More information will follow. We also have an announcement. Did you know that the ICA is turning 40 this year? This is significant because the ICA has been the sole nonprofit organization dedicated to IC-BPS for 4 decades. Please join us as we reflect on this significant year, and we acknowledge our achievements and look ahead to the future. Keep an eye on your inbox for ICA emails, follow us on social, and participate in our 40th anniversary activities. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Moldwin.
Okay, bye.